land and sea. I have seen blood running from the wounded. I have seen men coughing out their gasped lungs. I have seen the dead in the mud. I have seen cities destroyed. I have seen 200 limping, exhausted men come out of line, survivors of a regiment of 1,000 that went forward 48 hours before. I have seen children starving. I have seen the agony of mothers and wives. We in America are wiser in using our wealth on projects like this, which will give us more wealth, better living, and greater happiness for our children.
I wanted to be a pilot since I was 8 years old. So when the opportunity arose, World War II, I was drafted. I waited because I was trying to get through school. And I applied and got into the Air Force cadets.
Buddy and I got out of high school and we joined the service in '45.
During World War II, there was no question but what if Hitler and his group of people were not stopped, and the Japanese, there was a good question that the United States would suffer and become not the United States. Something else would happen. So it was absolutely necessary that we get an armed force that was able to get out there and bring that war to a conclusion. Volunteering in that particular case, I think, was what most anyone would do if they were able to do it. And that was the case. We had a big voluntary armed forces.
As I recall, the Navy had some excellent training programs, and I thought I would be fortunate enough to get assigned where I could, learn something. So I saw the Navy as having a lot more to offer.
I graduated high school in about the 11th of June, and I was in the Navy like on the 20th.
When I was 17, and they told me I had a heart condition. So I became a toolmaker apprentice. I decided I'm going to try again, and I had already taken a few flying lessons. So I tried for the Naval Air Force, and the heart condition had disappeared. I don't know what it was, but that was fate, I guess.
I was a student in college, and draft was always in the background, but I wanted to be in the Air Force, Air Corps, I should say. So I enlisted as a student.
I enlisted because my brother was in the Navy, and we hadn't heard from him in about 4 months. Oh, I felt I should do something patriotic. I come from New York City, and the recruiting office was down on Madison Avenue. And I got in the elevator, and in came a lady Marine. She was absolutely stunning in her uniform. She must have been a model. So instead of getting off at the 8th floor for the Waves, I got off at the 7th floor for the Marine Corps.
I enlisted, sir, in 1941, almost a year before the war. I enlisted for the year, but I enlisted. And they sent me to Fort Meade, Maryland, because I was a baker. And they sent me to Fort Meade, Maryland, to teach guys how to bake bread.
When I first went in the Navy, the biggest body of water that I'd ever seen was the Chattahoochee River. So I figured when I crossed that thing, I was overseas. So I never had seen anything any bigger than a rowboat. so I joined the Navy. I thought I'd be back in about 3 or 4 weeks. So I went over there and signed up for 6 years. That was a big mistake.
They sent me home, told me to wait for orders, and in February 1943, I got my orders to report to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. That's where they had the initial ground school and for the Navy program. And that was the beginning of almost 2 years of training.
You learn everything you can about what you're riding in or not going to ride in, or whatever necessary that you got to use, whatever kind of ammunition or whatever you might be necessary to use. Be sure you know how to use it. Well, I was shipped off to Sampson, New York in boot camp. And after that, I was sent to Newport, Rhode Island, on a little island in the middle of the Narragansett Bay where it was an air detail located there.
It wasn't all that bad. It was something new. You were with a lot of other girls that felt the same way. It was hard. We weren't used to the discipline because somebody was always telling us what to do and how to do it. But we survived our 6 or 7 weeks of basic training. Being on the second floor barracks, we didn't always get enough to eat out of the mess hall. So one night, I was the younger of the group, and they said, well, you go to the mess hall and pick up some fruit and some cookies. I said, okay. So I had my jacket on, and I went over, and coming back, I had all this food inside my jacket, and I was stopped by an MP. But he laughed, and he said, he let me go, but with the big warning, don't ever, ever steal from the mess hall again.
We flew PT-19s, which was a low-wing, two-place airplane, 175 horsepower, and we finished our basic training in that location in that airplane. I think it took about 3 months.
We got out of there, we were sent to Mobile, Alabama, Brooklyn Field, and we just stayed there till we got assigned. You see where we were going to get assigned, because we weren't assigned. About 4 months down there, they called us guys up, about 25 of us, and said that we were going to go with an outfit called the 7th ADG, 7th Air Depot Group. Guess is what? Truck drivers. What? You mean we went to school and you suddenly said, well, they have to fill the complement. So, and that was the best thing that ever happened to us.
After that training out there on the aircraft, our group made up in Columbia, South Carolina. So at that particular time, I became a flight chief. Well, first a crew chief, then a flight chief. And about that time was when our crews were being ready to go overseas. I went over as a ground crewman. I no sooner got over there than one of the flight leaders in our group asked if I wouldn't change over and become a flight engineer, which I really wanted to be anyway. So I had the opportunity, and so I started flying with the flight leader in our squadron. So then he and I were the only two of our crew that finished our careers in that particular flight group. The others were either injured or killed, as the case may have been.
They sent me to do the job there on the base there, and the men that I went to Mayport with, there was three shiploads out of Mayport. Every one that went out was sunk by a submarine that was out there. Every one of those three groups, and I would have been the first one that went through there, and I wouldn't be here today if I had, because all of those ships were sunk, no survivors.
And we fired for 3 days to stop the Germans. On the second night, one of our anti-tank guns fired and hit a German gasoline truck that was refueling 8 tanks preparing to attack. We opened fire, and we fired for a solid 2 or 3 hours, and we knocked out 3 of their tanks, and then they retreated. That was the end of their, the Kasserine Pass.
They'd come right at us right straight. And one of my best friends he was a pilot, and there was only one bullet hole in that plane, and it come in right above his head in the cockpit and killed him.
The first time we put our guns in position in North Africa at this airport, and we got in there late that night. In regards to what time you got there, you had to get that gun in the pit and everything get set up for the next morning. So the guys worked like hell doing it, and they did it, so they were tired and everything. I told them, okay, hit the bunk, I'll stay out on guard. So here I am out on guard alone, and big 55-gallon tanks of gas at the airfield, they popping off from the heat, cooling down, you know, from the heat in the day, and they had it cooling down, yeah. Okay, so we had a water can sitting over there, and looked like that water can was a person to me. And I looked at it as though it was moving, and I opened fire on it. And the guys came out of the tents with their rifles and everything. All right, Sergeant, what's up, what's up? And I said, okay, I got him. I said, go back to bed. We take care of it in the morning. And when they did get up, they found out I had unloaded on a water can. And they really teased me about that for a long time. Water can Joe, they called me.
He had so much shrapnel in his back. You'd think he was Swiss cheese but he survived.
When we got over to England, after 14 days on the water, ships were getting blown up like crazy. The Germans, you know, with the U-boats, bombing the hell out of them. And I didn't know until I saw the History Channel that out of 200 boats that went over there, 43 of them were sunk.
So then the Germans hit us. They come back. They had a tank. They had a old World War II French Renault tank. And that pulled up to the hedgerow. It couldn't cross the hedgerow. And my friend Tommy Wolford, he had a grenade launcher on an old tree rifle. He had, I'd get that tank. And as he went forward, if a tank fired, he killed him. I found him later. He had not a mark on his body, just a concussion from the shell. And he was lying on his face, on his stomach, with his hands folded in front of him. He had a smile.
It was so cold, but the anxiety and everything, sometimes it'd be that cold and you'd be sweating.
I married a professional ballroom dancer, and I lost her 27 years ago. But anyway, while we were getting married, we had a church wedding. She was Catholic, I was Catholic. And while we were getting married, the Jerrys are coming over, the sirens started going off, and everybody in church started going like this. And I was married by a RAF priest. He was a major, Father O'Neill, and he bent down there while we were on our knees and he said, "You youngsters must be very popular. Even the German Air Force is celebrating your wedding."
What we didn't know, that the German code had been broken and they were reading their mail. They knew more, but they couldn't tell us that they were doing that, again, for obvious reasons. And so, but we often wondered why we were so busy, sometimes flying day and night, and other times just sitting around on your duff with nothing to do. It was because they knew when the submarines were there, they knew they were there, and approximately where they were.
One of these storms came up in the middle of the day. I mean, you couldn't even see. And the B-24 was called back to come back to our base, and as they were coming back, they were over this little schoolhouse with 46 little kids in there going to lunch. And as they were over the school, lightning hit it. Busted the thing up with all the gas and lighted and killed everybody in there. It was the most horrible scene you ever want to see. I'll never forget that, man.
40 miles, a line of 40 miles from Eindhoven, or the Belgian border, to Arnhem. Oh, that was a sight to see. 40,000 troopers coming down, and it was a beautiful jump on a Sunday, noon Sunday, just a picnic, no firing, nothing, just come right down. Nice open soft fields that were plowed, and but then after, we ran into big trouble. The Germans bombed us in Eindhoven. We had taken the town of Eindhoven. We had, and the Germans sent bombers over. First time it was bombed, and they bombed the city. And They cut our lines up on Hell's Highway. And they used a lot of mortars and artillery, and I lost a lot of friends.
Because it was getting towards the end of the war, they used to just give you one destination, and that was it. If it was somebody had already bombed it ahead of you, because planes are flying all over that sky.
Actually, they were good. They were good people. I'll tell you something that they probably don't know, but we even took one of the guys and went ashore with him, dressed him up in our uniform, and went out and had a party, and had a few Budweisers and brought him back, and he was a happy man as you ever seen. He was happy to be there, and they were nice people.
We did a lot of searching to start with for the Japanese fleet, and you sort of hoped you didn't find them, because if you did, you were going to be out there pretty well on your own with maybe a couple hundred Japs around, and that wouldn't be too good odds for you. We would avoid the Japs in the sky because they were far superior to us. The Japs were getting more and more involved in this kamikaze bit, and they were really going after us. I mean, they would come in by the dozens, and they'd go look for anything that was floating, but they were always looking for the carriers. One pilot was shot down on the very first flight he ever took over the Jap territory. We never saw him again. And we had another fellow who was shot down by the Japs, and he landed his plane, and it was all beat up. He landed on the shoreline of one of the islands out there, and the people out there on the island, they rescued him, so to speak. They put him in a little outrigger boat and took him out, and the Navy brought in a big PBY. They loaded him on that and hauled him off. Beautiful operation. They pulled it off beautifully.
We was the first squadron of destroyers that went into Tokyo Bay. We went in there one night and bombarded it and come back out. I think we got credit for sinking a ship. We was the first ships that went into Tokyo Bay.
I spent my war years over in China, which was very unusual duty. And one of the most memorable things that ever happened to me in my entire life happened in the town of Ningxia, which is south of the Gobi Desert and north of the big city of Xi'an. We were in a 6x6 truck, 4 of us, and we'd been on the road for a long time, and we decided we would just love to have a bath. So there was a provincial governor there named Ma, and we knew that if we let people at the gate know that we were interested in the bath, that he might invite us. So sure enough, we got an invite to Governor Ma's private baths. And it was a big mud-type building, which they all were over there, with a big room all in gray tile and 6 9-foot square pools in there. And we, 4 of us, went in, and there were a bunch of young Chinese boys all over the place. They were the ones that were going to give us a bath. So we jumped in the pool, each of us took one, and we warmed up, felt pretty good. We hadn't had a bath in God knows how many months, because we were traveling through China and there wasn't, convenient places. But anyway, these boys beckoned me out of the pool to lay down on the side, and they proceeded to wash me like we attack our shoes when we clean and polish our shoes. And they were scraping and rubbing, and by the time they were all done, I felt like they had peeled my skin off. And I just, felt like they were dumping me back into a pot of boiling oil. And I had an experience that I knew I would remember for the rest of my life.
Well, I can give you a description of my first mission, which was not typical, because we loaded up with bombs, gasoline, and we went to a staging area. Now, a staging area is 300 or 400 miles beyond your base, where you get more fuel, but you load it with bombs. We landed, and the brakes felt a little spongy, you might say, and we crashed at the end of the runway. Bombs hung in the racks. We had a hard time getting out because it sort of plowed into the dirt. The bottom of the aircraft, where we would normally go out, was filled with dirt, so we had to go out the top. But none of us got hurt. So then we scratched that mission, returned to our base, and the next day we started over again. They were very strict about things like leaving your laundry on your bed. That is the finished laundry, the package. And I left my laundry on the bed, or I didn't know it was coming. Anyway, it was Christmas Eve, and they put me on guard duty about half the night, just for leaving that package on my bed.
The destruction was huge. I landed at an airfield near Yokohama, and we drove maybe 20, 30 miles to downtown Tokyo. And everywhere you looked, it was just everything leveled to the ground. The only thing remaining was masonry chimneys sticking up. The devastation was very heavy.
This was in the afternoon that we arrived there. And it was, total destruction. Absolutely, it was scary. Everything was demolished. There was nothing standing. There was no noise at all, no birds, no insect noise. It was like a tomb.
They used to send us out like they call Tomcat Duty. That's where you sent the destroyers ahead of the ships, like a decoy to pull them suicide planes, off from the task force. So that was pretty rough duty. So we got tacked out there 2 or 3 times. Went to the Philippines. General MacArthur come back over there. It was right during the war, and all of them guards was around him. So we were so close to the island, that our rudder got stuck in the mud, and the Japs was shooting at us from a shore, but they hit a couple of turrets up there, but it didn't hurt them. The only time I got scared was after the war, and when they signed the peace, for peace, well, some of them Japanese hadn't got the word yet, so we got attacked that night. So I told somebody, I said, well, this is a heck of a note. That ain't the way I said it. I said, this is a heck of a note here. We done went through the whole war, and we're going to get sunk. And Jap planes was diving at us.
The war was over. A lot of the people that I flew with met as a group. It's the 57th Bomb Wing. They met, and I was not able to attend. I'm still working full-time because I enjoy working, and I do, so I wasn't able to make that meeting. But about a week after they met, one of my friends who was up there met the fellows whose life I had saved in that aircraft, and I got a letter after 50 years from him thanking me for, which of course I didn't need to be thanked. No one is ever a hero by, it's because you're there and you do what has to be done at the time. But for him to have done that after 50 years, I thought was really something special. In my opinion, the persons who volunteer to be in our service in order to protect our country and to do those things that are necessary to keep us, the rest of everyone else out there, safe is a very, very important task. I think anyone who can accomplish that and do the job and learn what they may while they're in the service is just an excellent career.
I'm just glad I'm out of it, that's all, that I serve my purpose.
But I enjoyed being in the service. When I was there, I enjoyed everything that we did there.
Be proud of your country and take care of it.
Things beyond I know they are, I do not need to see. For things inside, the treasures hid, the secrets that I keep. For things beyond, the bridges burned, and those I wish I'd saved. For things above 1,000 tongues, the angels and the saints, the chaos of a life.